Jim Downing, leadership. You have been a leader in the military, you've been a leader in the Navigator movement, you've been a leader as a layman around the world for a number of decades. So tell us a bit about leadership.
A few years ago I was asked to write a 400-word article on leadership for our military mission. So that's not many words, but I chose to use Napoleon as a model for the observations I wanted to make. He was called by some of his contemporaries and later the greatest political and military leader of all times. Now, his motives are not something to imitate, but his strengths may be. I went through a bunch of quotes that he had given out, and in one case he gave a general an assignment, and he said, I will give you anything you ask for except time. Remember, the world was created in 6 days. And the British general who finally defeated him, General Wellington, said his presence on the battlefield was worth 40,000 extra men. So he had a way of boosting the morale of people like that. I liked his quick thinking ability. That I read that one day he was reviewing his honor guard, and his horse reared up, wouldn't settle down, about to throw him, maybe fall on him. So a private stepped out of the ranks, grabbed the horse, pulled him down, and as soon as the horse's hoofs hit the ground, Napoleon said, "Thank you, Captain." And the private, of course, said, "What company?" And he said, "This one." Relieve the commanding officers. That was his job, to take care of Napoleon. That's pretty quick thinking, you know. The minute his horse hits the ground, "Thank you, Captain," promoted on the spot there. I like his quick thinking. I read that one night he was late at night going around the perimeters of his camp and found a sentry asleep. Well, in wartime, that's a death sentence. So what he did was picked up the soldier's rifle and started walking the post. After a while, when the soldier woke up, why, he saw Napoleon turn his rifle. And of course, you know what he expected. But Napoleon told him, he said, "Now, I know you're tired and weary, but this is a very important job you have to do." Handed back his rifle and says, "Don't do it again." Went on his way. Another time, a soldier was being operated on a battlefield, a piece of shrapnel under his heart. And the battlefield surgeon didn't have any anesthetic. And he was in great pain. So he would cut and then probe, cut and probe. And Napoleon, the soldier said, "Doctor, if you go any deeper, you're going to cut my heart out." And the doctor said, "Well, I'm sorry, but we've got to get it out of there, you know." And then the soldier kind of smiled and he said, "If you cut my heart out, you will find Napoleon inside." So he was able to inspire that kind of loyalty. But in an analysis of him, it's been said there's no such thing as a well-rounded person. For every strength, there's a corresponding weakness. So in another general, in evaluating Napoleon, said he chose a staff person to complement every weakness. So there was no part that wasn't covered. He chose a person that could cover. Now, on the matter of leadership, at the end of World War II, the leaders of the academies, military academies, got together and said, we have just had the greatest laboratory on leadership in history. Now, let's find out who the leaders were and compare them to our manuals on leadership. So the result was they threw their leadership manuals away. Because for centuries, and still today, there's a book that comes out on the attributes of a leader. And they're generally intelligence and honesty and integrity and morality. You know, they got this list of 267 things. So as they evaluated the leaders in World War II, high on the list were Patton and Halsey. And according to their own evaluation, they didn't fit very many categories that they had down. So the services came up with a new evaluation of a leader. And so the Air Force, I think, came up with the best conclusion, and that was, ask two questions. Did he accomplish the mission? And two, did he wisely use the resources available? Did he use 1,000 planes when 100 would have done the job? You know, those two questions. Did he accomplish the mission? So that's the evaluation that I feel strong about a leader. Did he accomplish the mission? Now, military leaders have come up through the years with what they call the 9 principles of war. And this is a study of all the military engagements in history.
Wow.
And then they look at the winner and try to find out what did he do right that the loser didn't do right. And by far in these 9 principles of war, they call them, the number 1 is the maintenance of the objective. Lincoln could not get his generals to perform because they were obsessed with capturing Richmond. Well, that wasn't the objective. We talked about this under spiritual warfare, that the objective is to make the enemy abandon his will and submit to yours. You do that through destroying his main force. And just to review what General Marshall, the order he gave General Eisenhower in World War II, was in cooperation with the Allies, land on the continent of Europe, seek out and destroy the German army. That was the objective. Stuck with it. Not capture real estate. Not bomb supply lines. You know, those are all soften up things, but you have to destroy the enemy's main force. So Napoleon could inspire people, and in his mission, which is not the most noble in the world, he knew how to set about it. And he said once that, I know men. Jesus Christ was not a man. He said he commanded an allegiance and love that no human could inspire. In fact, he said, people follow me with a desire for reward or a fear of punishment. But they followed Jesus because they loved him. So on leadership, it seems to be well, I have my own definition of a leader. Now there's so many facets of leadership you can't keep track of them. But what I've come down to is a leader is someone who accomplishes something of significance which otherwise would not have been accomplished.
Wow.
There's a lot of talk today between difference between leaders and administrators and managers and leaders. Reader's Digest had a one-liner I thought was pretty good on this. It said, a leader knows what's best to do. An administrator knows how best to do it. A leader sees the need of an administrator. An administrator may not see the need for a leader. Here. So what it boils down, I think, in just trying to hold this to 400 words in that paper, what I felt that Napoleon was an example of a person that was imbued by purpose. He had an objective, and he knew how to lead people toward the accomplishing of the objective. And another thing he said once, a bullet that will kill me has not yet been molded. And during his campaigns, he had 6 horses killed underneath him, but he was never touched in his entire career by an enemy bullet or weapon. In that, he just almost felt like he was invincible, I guess, when he was leading. So it tried to separate his strengths from his personality. Maybe something you can pick up.
Jim, what would be some comparisons, contrasts with Lorne Sanny as a leader?
Yeah, well, Lorne had a pull-out leaf on his desk, and typed on that leaf was my objective. And he'd pull it out very often on there. So he considered his objective was to set, maintain, and clarify the objectives of the Navigators. So I mentioned earlier that often the team around him came in with great ideas. And I've seen him pull out that thing on his desk, look at it, set, clarify, and maintain the objectives of the Navigators. Doesn't fit. He wouldn't get involved in it. So he knew how to maintain, set and maintain objectives, and what his was. Which of the 9 principles of war, that is by far the most important. You know, the maintenance of the objective, which of course means you have to have one. And then your whole life is the maintenance of the objective.
And backing that up even then to Doss Trotman, because he seemed to be an extremely different type of leader. What would be some comparisons and contrasts?
Well, I think he was kind of like Ignatius of Loyola, who founded the Jesuit order. And he was a French army officer, a Spanish army officer. And in battle with the French, he was wounded. And while he was recovering from being wounded, why, that's when he became a follower of Christ. But the French respected his ability so greatly, they didn't take him prisoner. When they captured his post, they set him free, just out of admiration for the way that he had acted. So after he became a follower of Jesus, he went around, and there's 50 biographies been written about Ignatius. And I've read some of them. He'd go into town, and he supported the order, the Jesuits he raised up, by begging half day. And people come around and talk to him. Young men his own age would say, what do you do? And he said, well, I'm a follower of Christ, you know. And they said, well, could we go with you? And they were so attracted to his personality that we want to do what you want to do. Well, Dawson Trotman, in his mind, is clearly defined what he was after. But his explanation and communication was not that clear, just as it's not that been clear by any navigator down through the ages. But it's very clear. Here's a man, has a vision of God, from God. He's got confidence in it. He's got promises. He knows where he's going. And if you want to be in the big leagues, follow him. That's the reason people followed him, was the strength of his conviction and personality. So he didn't have a lot of it in writing, but it was in his life all along. So he certainly had an objective, and he maintained it, although he used a little more different than a scholarly approach.
Okay.
I've tried to reflect back in my time that I spent with him. If I ever heard him urge anybody to leave what they're doing and follow him, I can't remember a case. And it's almost like his attitude was, I know where I'm going. If you're smart, you'll get on. Don't want to get on board? He didn't beg anybody to come, you know. Well, that's kind of contagious, you know. Hey, I know where I'm going. I know what I'm doing, you know.
Jim, do you see any patterns that would concern you regarding the development of leaders for this generation?
Well, the name is terribly misused, I think. That the world is raising up teachers of teachers. Not too many leaders of leaders, teachers of teachers. I think we've used this term in other sessions here that I read the other day, 5% are doers, 95% are imitators. So I think we use the term rather poorly when we're talking about leaders, especially if you use my definition. A leader is someone who accomplishes something of significance, which otherwise wouldn't happen. His brand is there. And when I go around to a NAV activity, I try to see if it reflects the strengths of his personality. Or does he just follow a manual? Is he just imitating what somebody else has done? Or is he making a difference? Is the ministry going to be different because of him? That things are going to happen that wouldn't happen unless he'd been the leader there. So I think that all we have to do is look at Congress and wonder how we're doing for leadership in the nation. And the public's pretty good at figuring that out. That I don't know what the present popularity of Congress is, but at one time He was lower than used car salesman.
That sounds fairly low. Yes. Oh. Jim, what are, yeah, just a few thoughts, and you've spoken to this a little bit, but what are some things that older leaders can do that would help to mentor the new generation, the next generation, the coming generation of leaders in the body of Christ?
What was the first part of the question again?
What are some things that some of the elder leaders, some of the current leaders can do to mentor and develop the coming generation of leaders in the body of Christ to reach the world for Christ?
I had a friend in Washington when I lived there, a lawyer, and he had founded a law school, which later became a part of James Madison University in Virginia. We were good friends, had lunch occasionally together. So I asked him one day, I said, why did you feel it was necessary to found a law school? And he said, well, the primary requirement of a lawyer is to be able to think. So I founded this law school to try to teach lawyers to think. Just that simple. Now, when I wrote the book Living Legacy, I had far more stuff on Lauren than we ever used. And there's one thing I wish I'd have forced in there, and that was a dear staff letter he wrote on think. And he not dear staff letter, he tells about how Dawson Trotman drove him crazy almost on this issue. I guess you could probably say observe and think. But they'd visit a home, and after they'd visit a home, get in the car, drive away, and Dawson would turn to him and say, how many colors of flowers were they in the lawn? There, how many flower beds and how many flowers? And ask him all these questions, you know. So he just knew that, you know, Dawson was going to ask him some questions to see whether he was thinking and observing or not. Well, this dear staff letter that I wish I'd have gotten into the book, he tells what he learned from Dawson Trotman on how to think. So I don't remember all the details, but we need to constantly question everything that we do. So he would say, what time do you set the alarm for? You get up in the morning. Well, 5:30. Why 5:30? Why not 5:45? Why not 5:15? Are you just in a rut on that, you know? Is there a reason for it? Is that the best thing to do? And his whole dear staff letter is on that. Teach people to think. And I really think what Lauren was getting at was think outside the box, you know. So maybe my friend the lawyer is right, you know, the greatest need people is to learn to think. And think out of the box. Now I'm trying to think just instantly of an application to that because I think it's very important. And Lauren could think objectively. I do have one example in the book that's not the best I can think of, but he felt like he had to prove everything. So anything that took place in the Navigators office, he had to sign. So we had one guy that his job was to keep the bathrooms clean. So he wrote up a job description of what his job was. So it went to Lauren for approval, and Lauren looked at it. And you were supposed to mop 3 times a day, change the paper, you know, all these routines. So it was by time segments, what you did, you know, how often. And Lauren just took one look at it and threw it away. And said, his job description is to keep the bathroom clean. You know, maybe his routine was 10 times as much or 1/10 of what it should. But he would think and think objectively, you know, outside the box. So I think that's the greatest thing, and this is not new. So let me just reflect a little bit further on that. I have a book on the Talmud, Jewish Talmud, you know, with its 2,800 commands in it. And it's mostly stories and wise things of the rabbis. So there's a story in there about a young rich man's son went off to college, be gone for 4 years before he came home. So about the 3rd year he was away, the chief servant that owned the estate, or that worked on the estate, came and handed him a will, and he said, your father died and left all the estate to me. And only one mention of you is, and you could choose one and one only item out of the estate. So the student was devastated, went to the rabbi, and why would he do that? You know, no explanation. That devastated, my life's ruined. And the old rabbi just looked at him and said, your generation can never figure things out. So the young guy wondered what he meant. He said, well, your father knew if he left the estate to you, that the servants would live it up, divide it up, steal it, take everything. But by leaving to him, they kept it in good shape, you know. And he said, by telling you that you could have one thing, he knew you would choose the servant, because it was illegal for a servant to own property. So that was just your dad's way of making sure you got it. So the kind of rabbi said, your generations, you can't figure things out at all. You have to think and see why they do that. So I thought that was a good example in there of what it is to think. And personally, I'll make a statement I probably can't back up, that there's nothing that I know of that's being done that is the best way. Everything that's ever being done is done inferior. So you take it, any look at anything in life, ministry, what you're doing, anything, there's a better way to do it than is being done. If somebody just think about that better way and do it. So I haven't done a lot of speaking and writing on that subject, but I could sometime, you know. And I think you've touched on the greatest need is to teach people to think.
Good. Jim, one last question. Who would be some Christian leaders that you would encourage people to admire and look up to, living or dead? And you've mentioned obviously Napoleon and Lawrence Sanney, Doss Trotman. Do any other leaders stand out to you? Not that they were good in everything, but that these are the kind of men or women that we want to aspire.
Well, I think there's a lot of them that fit my criteria, that a leader is someone who accomplishes something of significance that otherwise would have been accomplished. So just offhand, the first person I'd think of is Martin Luther. You know, he didn't have to leave the church, but he had strong convictions. And then a bunch of people have followed him. And then you come down the line to people like Billy Graham. Lauren used to observe that probably not a preacher in the world that wouldn't like to have Billy Graham's platform. But Lauren pointed out it was his faith that got honored. He'd signed a contract for $20 million worth of airtime without any money. That's what God honored about him, was his faith, you know. I believe God wants this crusade held, or this TV broadcast, so he'll bring in the money, you know, in that. So people want his platform, but they don't pay the price for his faith in that. So I can't point out any. I think the pioneers, leaders that I admire the most are people like Stanley, Charles Stanley, and down in Florida, James Kennedy, and then Adrian Rogers. You know, these are people that you can't turn on the TV at any time of the day. You know, you can't sleep at 2 o'clock. Turn it on, you'll find one of them speaking. And the radio, you know, I don't even keep track of the radio with it all. And sometimes you can hear the same message 6 times in 2 hours on there. Well, these are guys that accomplish something. You know, these are the kind of guys that I admire.
Yeah. Good. Well, Jim, again, thank you. And I really think one of the highlights of our time is this definition that it's someone who accomplishes something important that otherwise wouldn't have happened. And that leaves the door open for people that may not be very well known, but a person can take leadership within their sphere of influence and trust God and take steps to accomplish something important. And it may not ever make it into the newspapers.
Well, and this covers a lot of areas. I was listening to Avery Willis at a conference a few months ago, and he was talking about the difference between Teflon and Velcro. And he just kind of, by the way, he said, do you know who invented Velcro, you know, to snap? And I had no idea. He said, well, it was an Australian shepherd that he found out he had to have a knife and a pair of pliers to get a cockerel out of the fleece on his sheep. So he wondered, how in the world does that thing get in there? We have to cut it out. Well, he found out that for every hook there was an eye. And that cockerel, when it got in the wool, you know, it put the hook through the eye. So Velcro, you know, that you use to tie up your cord there, you know, is a hook and eye in there. So there's just a lot of things like that, practical and Christian, better way to do things. Yeah. And the people that change them are the people that think.
I remember someone saying you can pay people to do everything except 2 things. One was to think well, and then to do things in order of priority. Thank you for these thoughts, Jim. Thanks very much.